Today we're going to talk about standard form for a quadratic function. So when we have a quadratic function, remember, it has something being squared. So when we have x being squared, this is a quadratic. Now this quadratic form looks different than the one we learned before. This is standard form. We know vertex form. And just to refresh us, vertex form looks like this. Now what we want to do sometimes in math is we want to go from standard form to vertex form, or from vertex form to standard form. Today we're going to learn how to go from standard form and put it back into vertex form. Now, parts of this I'm just going to tell you how to do it. If you want to know why it works, we need to first learn and talk about factoring. So, before we talk about factoring, I'm just going to tell you how. Once we get through factoring, I'm going to show you why it works, what we're going to do today works. So today is how, later we'll talk about the why. So for now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get an equation from standard form and put it into vertex form. So this is what we're going to be doing. Let's try an example. So right now I have it written in vertex form, where this is A, B, and C. Notice between standard form and vertex form, the only thing that's the same is A. That's it. But that gives me a start. So if I have this, my vertex form, at least I know that this A is going to go right here. If I know nothing else, at least I can take this A and put it right there. Now what I need to do is find H and K. So to find H, we do negative B over 2A. Again, this is just how. In a little bit I'll explain why we come up with this. So for now, this is just how. So this is going to give us H. In this particular example, B is going to be the 10. So I put 10 in the numerator. I have a negative sign out front, so the negative goes with. And the denominator is 2 times my A value. So in this case, it's 2. I'm going to simplify this down. 10 over 4. And if I want to simplify it even more, it's going to be a negative 5 over 2. So all I've done right now is find H. I know H is negative 5 over 2. I'm going to go ahead and plug that in over here. So I've taken this and I just plugged it in right there for H. Negative 5 over 2. So now that I have H, what I need is K. In order to find that, I'm going to plug H back in here, and then this Y value will be K. Now, why is that going to work? Well, we remember, hopefully, that when we have H and K, this is a point. This is a very special point on the parabola. This is the vertex. So if I know H, and I plug it in for X, then that's going to give me this Y value that corresponds with H. So once I find H, I take it and plug it back in for X. Now I need to simplify this and evaluate. When I take 5 over 2 and square it, I square my numerator and I square the denominator. Also, when I square a negative number, it becomes positive. So this is going to give me, when I square 5, I get 25. When I square 2, I get 4. Then here, when we multiply, we just multiply our numerators. 10 times negative 5 gives me a negative 50. Then 1 times 2 gives me 2. Then I add my 7. I want to keep simplifying. When I take 2 times 25 over 4, that's going to give me 25 over 2. When I take 50 and divide by 2, I get 25. Bad 5. Then I add 7. Again, I still want to keep simplifying. So this is going to be a positive, for those of you that like decimals, 12.5. Then a negative 25 and a positive 7 is going to give me a negative 18. Then I subtract, and I get a negative 5.5 for y. Now remember, I plugged h in here. When I found y, this represents what very specific y value? Well, it represents the y value that goes along with h in my vertex. Or in other words, this y value represents k. So this is going to be k. And I'm going to take it and replace it here in my equation. So now I have everything filled in vertex form like I want. All I need to do is simplify because I don't like having two signs next to each other. So this is just going to become y equaling 2, x plus 5 halves, or you could write 2.5 minus 5.5. So now we've taken our quadratic from standard form and we've turned it into vertex form. The reason why we like to do that is because it's usually easier to graph parabolas when they're in vertex form, because you can easily see the vertex, you know exactly what numbers to pick to plug in so you know what it looks like. Back here, it's going to be hard to tell which numbers to plug in. So a lot of the time they want you to go from standard form to vertex form. Now let's try graphing when they start out in standard form. So they're going to want you to graph. Like this. So it's in standard form. It's hard to graph in standard form. So first what we want to do is put it in vertex form. In vertex form we know that h is one point of our vertex and it represents negative b over 2a when we have it written in standard form. So let's plug in to find h. I'm going to plug in 2 for b. Then I'm going to plug in this 1 here for a. And this is going to give me a negative 1 for my h value. To find k, we plug in the negative 1 here and here because this is the h value for the vertex. The k value goes along with the h value. So I plug in negative 1 in for x. Then I'm going to simplify. My negative 1 squared gives me 1. My negative 1 times 2 is going to give me a negative 2. I simplify. It's going to give me a negative 1 plus 5 gives me 4. So now I have h, I have k, and I know my a value is still 1. So I'm going to write it in vertex form. So my 1 goes right out here. I don't have to write it because it's just a 1. So x minus my h value, which is a negative 1, That means it's going to be written like that, plus 1. Then my k goes here. Now that I have it written in vertex form, it's going to be easy to graph. So I make my table of values. I know my vertex point already. -1, 4 is my vertex. Now I want to pick two numbers that come before -1 and two numbers that come after. I take these values and plug it in. I could plug them in here, or I could plug them in over here. I think it's easier to plug in vertex form since I only have one x. So if I plug in a -2, this gives me a -1. I square it to get 1. I add 4, and that's going to be a 5. When I plug in a -3, this is going to give me a -2. I square it to get 4. I add 4 to get 8. Now again, I can plug in 0 and 1, but I know that it's going to be symmetric about the vertex, so I can just repeat my numbers. So now we know what values we have. We come back to our graph and we want to plot them. So at -1, I'm up here at 4. At 0, I'm at 5. At -2, I'm at 5. At +1, I'm at 8. Maybe over here. So this is what my graph is going to look like when we take it from standard form, turn it into vertex form, get our x and y chart, and plot the points.